Get her off my firing line. Damon Kirka said it loud enough for every soldier in 2nd Platoon to hear. He didn't lower his voice. He didn't hesitate. He pointed at the woman standing 15 feet away, calm, steady, not flinching, and he laughed. And when he laughed, the men around him laughed too. Because that's how it works in a unit where the loudest voice sets the temperature. Naomi Achower said nothing. She picked up her kit, turned, and walked away. And every single person on that firing line believed they had just watched someone accept their place. They were wrong. If this story already has you feeling something, stay with me. Subscribe to this channel and follow this story all the way to the end, because what happens next will change the way you think about who belongs on a battlefield. Drop a comment with the city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The heat at FOB Kamara does not arrive gradually. It does not ease you in. It lands on you the moment you step outside, full weight, full force, like a hand pressing flat against your chest, and reminding you that you are in a place that does not care whether you belong there or not. Djibouti in late summer is not a place that forgives inattention. The sun does not negotiate. The wind carries grit that finds its way into everything: your food, your eyes, your lungs, the folds of your gear. Soldiers who have been stationed there longer than 3 months stop complaining about it, because complaining requires energy that the heat has already taken from them. Naomi Achower arrived on a Tuesday morning. She stepped off a transport vehicle with a single bag over her left shoulder and a medical kit strapped across her back, and she stood for exactly 4 seconds in the open air before she started moving. Not because she was in a hurry, because she had already identified where she needed to go. The processing tent was at her 10 o'clock 40 meters out. She had read the base layout during the flight. She had memorized it the way other people memorize routes home, not because she was told to, but because that is who she is. Nobody came to greet her. That was not unusual. New personnel arrive and the base absorbs them quietly, the way a body absorbs a vitamin. It does its job without fanfare. But the absence of acknowledgement is different from the absence of observation. People noticed her. They just didn't say anything meaningful about what they saw. She was a woman. She was a combat medic. She was assigned to 2nd Platoon as support staff. 3 things stacked together that told most of the unit everything they thought they needed to know. 2nd Platoon operated under the direct supervision of Sergeant Damon Kirka, and if FOB Kamara had an unofficial center of gravity, Kirka was it. He was not the highest-ranking soldier on the base. He was not the most decorated. But he carried himself with the particular brand of confidence that men in certain environments mistake for leadership: loud, physical, immediate. He filled rooms. He dominated briefings. When he walked through the common area, conversations adjusted themselves around him the way traffic moves around an accident. He did not demand attention. He simply existed at a volume that made ignoring him difficult. Naomi met him on her 3rd day. She had been running through her inventory checklist in the medical bay, a converted storage unit on the eastern edge of the base that smelled of antiseptic and canvas, when the door opened without a knock and Kirka stepped inside with 2 members of his squad behind him. He looked around the room the way men look at places they have already decided are beneath them. "You the new medic?" he asked. "Yes, Sergeant." He nodded slowly, looking at her gear spread across the table. "Support staff," he said. Not a question, a classification. "Combat medic," she said, and kept working. He tilted his head slightly, the way people do when they hear something that amuses them. "Right," he said. Then he turned to the 2 soldiers behind him, said something low enough that she didn't catch it, and all 3 of them laughed on the way out. That was it. That was the whole interaction. And yet something about it settled into the air of the medical bay like smoke, not dramatic, not visible, but present. Naomi finished her inventory, put her clipboard down, and stood very still for a moment. Then she went back to work. Dina Tariq, the unit's signals intelligence analyst, was the first person to actually speak to Naomi like she was a full human being. Dina was compact and efficient, the kind of person who takes up exactly the space she needs and not 1 inch more. She knocked before she entered. She introduced herself by name and rank. She asked if Naomi needed anything for the bay that hadn't been supplied. "Water filtration's running slow," Naomi said. "And the secondary comms unit in here is 4 frequencies behind current protocol." Dina raised an eyebrow. "How long have you been here?" 3 days. Dina looked at the comms unit, then back at Naomi, and something shifted in her expression. Not surprise exactly, more like recognition. I'll get someone to look at the filtration. The comms update I can do myself. I'd appreciate it, Naomi said. They did not become friends immediately. Friendship in deployed environments is a slow thing. It grows in the margins, in shared silences, in the small moments of professional respect that accumulate over time. But from that day forward, Dina Tariq paid attention to Naomi Akur in a way that no one else on the base did. Not because Dina was soft or sentimental, but because Dina's entire job was pattern recognition, and Naomi was a pattern worth studying. The briefing room at FOB Kamara was a rectangle of barely contained noise. Lieutenant Idris Boateng ran the operational briefings with the quiet authority of a man who has learned that the loudest voices in a room are not always the most useful ones, but who had also made his peace with letting them dominate as long as the actual work got done. He was methodical, he was thorough. He was also, when pressed, a man who chose the path of least resistance in interpersonal conflict, which meant that Karika's behavior in his briefings went largely unchecked. Naomi attended every briefing she was permitted to attend. She sat in the same position each time, second row far right, and she brought a small notebook that she wrote in with a mechanical pencil. Not because she needed to take notes to remember things, but because writing slowed her observation down to a speed she could fully process. She wrote questions she never asked out loud. She wrote discrepancies she noticed between the intelligence summary and the terrain analysis. She wrote the name of the vulnerability she had identified in Route Emerald's northern pass on day 7, underlined it, and closed the notebook. On day 9, Boateng was presenting the convoy routing for the following week's resupply run. Route Emerald was standard established low-risk classification used by the unit regularly enough that most of the soldiers in the room were only half listening. Naomi raised her hand. Boateng looked at her with the measured expression of a man deciding how much time he has. Achor. The northern pass on Route Emerald, she said. The ridge elevation on the eastern side creates a blind corridor approximately 200 meters long. If someone wanted to stage a coordinated engagement, that's where they'd do it. We don't have eyes on that ridge in the current ISR rotation. The room did not go silent. That would have been a dramatic response, and what happened was more honest than drama. People just didn't react much at all. A few soldiers exchanged glances. One of Kirka's people in the front row shifted in his seat. Kirka himself turned around in his chair and looked at her with an expression of theatrical patience. Medic, he said, drawing the word out just enough to make the point without technically crossing a line. Route Emerald has been run 40-something times in the past year. You want to tell the lieutenant that 40 runs of collective experience missed something you caught from a map. I want to flag a potential gap in ISR coverage, she said. Her voice was completely level. That's all? Noted, Boateng said, and he moved on. That was the moment. That small, quiet institutional burial of a legitimate tactical observation. Not because it was wrong, but because the person who raised it had been pre-categorized in a way that made her concerns feel optional. Naomi wrote 2 words in her notebook after the briefing ended. She did not share them with anyone. She closed the notebook and went back to the medical bay. The 2 words were blind corridor. Aiden Calloway introduced himself on day 11. He was a rifleman attached to 2nd Platoon, quiet by squad standards, the kind of soldier who let his performance speak rather than his personality. He came into the medical bay with a minor hand injury, nothing serious, a friction burn from a rope exercise, and while Naomi cleaned and dressed it, he watched her work with an attention that was more deliberate than casual. You're faster than the last medic we had, he said. Efficiency matters in the field, she said. Where'd you train? Advanced skills pipeline, then special operations medical protocol. He was quiet for a moment. Most people who come out of that pipeline don't end up assigned as support staff. She didn't look up from the bandage. No, she said, they usually don't. He seemed to want to say something more. Instead, he thanked her, looked at his wrapped hand and left. But the next day he came back not with an injury but with a question about altitude medication protocols that he clearly didn't need answered. And the day after that he found a reason to be near the medical bay again. He was doing what perceptive people do when they encounter something that doesn't fit the category it's been placed in. He was looking more closely. Naomi let him look. She didn't perform for it. She just kept working. What Aiden was seeing, if he had the language for it, was precision without noise. Every movement in that medical bay had a purpose. The way she arranged her supplies, not alphabetically, not by size, but by frequency of emergency use in the specific environment they were operating in. The way she ran through her mental checklist before leaving for the day, not from a written list, but from a sequence she had built so deeply into her habits that it looked effortless. The way she read the weather each morning and cross-referenced it with the weekly patrol schedule in a way that made no obvious sense to anyone who didn't understand that atmospheric pressure affects bleeding rates and wound clotting in ways that matter enormously if you're going to treat injuries 3 kilometers from the nearest cover. She was not thinking about being impressive. She was thinking about being ready. The thing about Naomi Akar that no one at FOB Akamara understood yet, because they had not read her file, because they had pre-assigned her a role and stopped looking, was that she had been doing this kind of preparation her entire adult life. Not because the military taught her to, because her grandfather did. His name was Salam, and he had spent 12 years as a marksman in the Algerian National Army before a knee injury ended his operational career, but not his relationship with the discipline that had shaped him. He raised Naomi from age 9 after her parents were killed in a car accident on a mountain road outside Tizi Ouzou, and he raised her the way he knew how, not with softness, not with hardness exactly, but with precision. With the belief that the world rewards people who see clearly and punishes people who see what they wish to see. He taught her to shoot on a hill behind their house with a rifle older than both of them, in conditions that changed every day, because he never let her practice in good weather twice in a row. He taught her that wind is not an obstacle, it is information. He taught her that distance is not a limitation, it is a calculation. And he taught her the thing that became the foundation of everything: stillness is survival. The rifle never misses, the body does. She did not become a soldier because of him. She became a soldier in spite of a world that told her the skills she carried were ornamental. Useful for sport, interesting at ranges, but not real, not tactical, not battlefield relevant for someone in her role. She enrolled in the Advanced Skills Pipeline at 23 and graduated in the top 3% of her cohort. She completed the Special Operations Medical Protocols course, where 31% of candidates failed to finish. She did not publicize these things. She put them in her file, which sat in a drawer at FOB Kamara that no one had opened since she arrived. The file was not the point. The preparation was the point. On day 14, something changed. Kirka had organized a live fire exercise on the northern edge of the base, a qualification run for 3 of his squad members who needed to recertify in long-range engagement before the upcoming convoy week. Naomi had no role in the exercise. She was not invited. But the medical base supply run took her past the firing line at the time the exercise was running, and she slowed down without fully stopping, watching the way you watch something when your professional brain can't help itself. One of the shooters was badly overcorrecting for wind. She could see it from the angle of his body, from the way his shots were grouping consistently left. It was a fixable problem. A simple one. She did not say anything. It was not her exercise. She was not asked. But she watched. And Kirka, who had eyes that moved constantly across the space around him, the way dominant men tend to do, saw her watching. He turned from the firing line and looked at her directly, and the expression on his face was the particular expression of a man who interprets anyone's attention as a challenge to his authority. "You need something, medic," he called out loud enough that everyone on the line heard it. "No, Sergeant," she said. "Then keep walking." She kept walking. Behind her, she heard laughter. Low brief, the social glue of a group enforcing its hierarchy. She did not turn around. She did not react. She counted her steps and thought about the wind on that line, which was coming in at 11 miles per hour from the northwest. And she calculated in 3 seconds what the correction factor should be for the engagement distances they were running. She said nothing. She kept walking. But Dina Tariq, who had come around the corner of the supply building at the tail end of the exchange, saw all of it. She saw Naomi walking away. She saw the laughter. She saw Kirka turn back to his firing line with the satisfied expression of a man who had just reinforced something important about the social order of his world. And she saw more clearly than anyone else on that base that Naomi Akar had not reacted because she had not needed to. That night, Dina knocked on the frame of the medical bay door and came inside. She sat down across from Naomi without being asked, put her elbows on the table and said, "You saw the wind correction issue." Naomi didn't look up from her supply list. "Yes." "You knew the fix." "Yes." "But you didn't say anything." Naomi put the supply list down. She looked at Dina the way people look at each other when they've decided to be honest. Would it have helped anything, or would it have cost me something? Dina was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He doesn't see you." "I know," Naomi said. "Neither does most of the unit. Does that bother you?" Naomi thought about that question the way she thought about most serious things, completely without rushing to an answer that felt better than a true one. Then she said, "It used to, when I was younger. My grandfather told me something once. He said the most dangerous soldier on any battlefield is the one nobody is watching." Dina looked at her for a long moment. "That's a hell of a thing to carry around." "It's not a burden," Naomi said. "It's a strategy." The convoy briefing for the following week's resupply run came on a Thursday. Boateng ran through the route, the vehicle assignments, the communication protocols, the medical contingency plan. Standard. Thorough. Naomi sat in her usual seat and listened to every word and wrote nothing in her notebook this time. She already knew everything she needed to know. Kirka was in the front row, leaning back with the comfortable posture of a man who has decided the information being presented is confirmatory rather than new. He asked two questions, both of which were reasonable, both of which were aimed at demonstrating his operational familiarity rather than uncovering new information. Boateng answered them patiently. At the end of the briefing, as soldiers filed out, Calloway found himself walking beside Naomi toward the door. He glanced at her closed notebook. "You usually write more," he said. "I usually have questions," she said. "You don't have any today." She paused at the door, letting two soldiers pass ahead of her. Then she said quietly, "I had a question 2 weeks ago. Nobody wanted to hear it." He looked at her. "The Northern Pass." She looked back at him. "You remembered." "I was listening," he'd said. She held his gaze for a moment, and what passed between them was not exactly a warning. It was more like a signal, the kind that people who are paying attention send to each other in environments where the official channels have been compromised by indifference. Then she walked out into the Djibouti heat, and the briefing room emptied around the absence of the conversation nobody official was willing to have. Convoy day was 3 days out. The desert around FOB Kamara was the same as it always was, indifferent, hot-wide. And somewhere in the silence that the base had manufactured for itself around Naomi Akura's presence, something was already in motion that nobody in 2nd Platoon had prepared for. Not the enemy, the oversight. Naomi Akura spent those 3 days the way she spent every day, working, watching, preparing. She re-inventoried her medical kit twice. She updated her trauma response protocol based on a threat assessment she had written herself in her own notebook at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night when the base was quiet and the wind from the northwest had shifted to 14 miles per hour. She pulled up the satellite imagery of Route Emerald's northern pass on the base's shared intelligence terminal and studied it for 45 minutes. She said nothing to anyone about what she saw there. She simply prepared. Because preparation, in the absence of being heard, is the only thing that cannot be taken from you. And on the day the convoy rolled out through the FOB's main gate, with the desert stretching wide and flat ahead of it, and the ridge lines of the northern pass waiting in the distance like a held breath, Naomi Akura climbed into the second vehicle, settled her kit, rested her hand on a rifle that wasn't in the manifest, and thought about her grandfather's voice. Stillness is survival. The rifle never misses. The body does. She breathed. She waited. And the desert, which had been listening all along, was about to ask her for everything she had. 3 days before the convoy rolled out, Naomi Akura did something that nobody on FOB Kamara noticed, and that was precisely the point. She requested access to the intelligence terminal at 2200 hours, late enough that the briefing room was empty, early enough that the overnight watch hadn't fully settled into its routine. The duty officer signed her in without looking up from his own paperwork. She sat down, pulled up the satellite imagery of Route Emerald, and did not move for 47 minutes. She was not looking at the route itself. Everyone looked at the route. The route had been cleared, assessed, and cleared again. The route was the part of the picture that everyone trusted because it was the part that had been studied the most. Naomi was looking at everything around the route, the ridge lines, the elevation changes, the shadows in the imagery that told her where the sun would be at 0900 hours on convoy day, and therefore where a shooter would position himself if he wanted the sun at his back and the convoy blinded by glare. She found 4 positions on the eastern ridge that satisfied those conditions. She found 2 on the western side that didn't require sun advantage because the elevation gave natural concealment. She marked none of them on the terminal. She memorized them. Then she logged out, thanked the duty officer who still didn't look up, and walked back to the medical bay in the dark. She sat on the edge of her cot for 11 minutes before she lay down. She thought about her grandfather, not the lessons the man himself. The way he used to sit on the porch of their house in the mountains after a long day and look at the hills the way a reader looks at a page completely still, completely present, like the hills had something to say, and he had decided years ago to be the kind of person who listened. He never told her what he was thinking during those silences. She used to ask him when she was young, and he would say the same thing every time. I am making sure I have not missed anything. She lay down on her cot. She had not missed anything. But she also had not been heard. And those two things she understood with a clarity that had been building for 14 days were about to collide with each other in a way that nobody on this base was prepared for. 48 hours before convoy day, Kirka ran a final equipment check for his squad in the vehicle bay. Naomi passed through on her way to collect a medical resupply from the quartermaster, and she heard him before she saw him, his voice carrying through the corrugated metal walls with the ease of a man who has never felt the need to lower it. Calloway, what's your secondary if the radio goes down at the pass? Visual signal, Sergeant. Green smoke, 2 bursts fall back to checkpoint Delta. Good. What's the medical contingency if we take a casualty at the choke point? A pause, then Calloway said, we radio for the medic. Which medic? Another pause. Shorter this time. A cower, Sergeant. Kirka's response came without hesitation. If things go sideways at the choke point, we are not waiting on support staff to come up from the rear vehicle. We handle our own until we can extract. Understood. Understood, Sergeant. Naomi stood outside the vehicle bay door and listened to that exchange, and she did not feel anger. What she felt was something colder and more useful, a kind of absolute certainty about how the next 48 hours were going to unfold. Not because she had a plan, but because Kirka had just made one for her without knowing it. He had confirmed out loud in front of his squad that she would be in the rear vehicle, which meant she would have line of sight to both ridgelines at the northern pass from the back position, which meant if she was right about what was waiting there, she would see it before anyone else did. She walked to the quartermaster, collected her resupply, and said nothing to anyone. That evening, Dina Tariq found her in the medical bay and closed the door behind her, which was unusual enough that Naomi put down what she was doing immediately. Talk to me, Naomi said. Dina sat down. She had the look of someone who has been turning a piece of information over in her head long enough that it has worn a groove there. I've been monitoring traffic on the secondary frequencies, she said, the ones we don't officially flag because the threat assessment on this sector is low. And there's been a pattern shift, not content. I haven't intercepted anything operational. But the timing and the frequency of transmission bursts changed 40 hours ago. Same general area, northern sector. Naomi was still. How significant is the pattern shift? Significant enough that I wrote it up and submitted it to Boateng this morning. What did he say? Dina's jaw tightened. He said the threat assessment on this sector is low and that one pattern anomaly without intercept content doesn't change the operational picture for a scheduled resupply run. The room was quiet for a moment. The bass sounds came through faintly voices, somewhere a vehicle engine, the wind against the walls. He's not wrong that it's not conclusive, Naomi said. No, Dina said. He's not wrong about that. But you're not convinced. I've been doing this for 6 years, Dina said. Pattern shifts like this one don't happen in isolation. Something changed in that northern sector. I don't know what, but something changed. Naomi looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, which vehicle are you in for the convoy? Command vehicle, second in column. I'm in the rear vehicle. Dina understood immediately. You'll have the angle. If there's anything to see, Naomi said, and if there is, Naomi picked up the supply list she had put down and looked at it without really seeing it. Then I'll handle it. Dina left without saying anything more. She did not ask what handle it meant. She did not ask what Naomi would do differently than any other soldier in the rear vehicle. She had learned in 14 days of watching Naomi Akor that some questions answer themselves if you are patient enough. What she did not know, what nobody on the base knew, was what Naomi had brought with her in that single bag she carried off the transport vehicle on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks ago, alongside the medical kit, alongside the notebook, alongside the mechanical pencil, and the quiet and the patience and the 14 years of preparation that had accumulated in her light groundwater, slow, invisible, and capable of tremendous pressure when it finally found an outlet. She had brought a rifle, not an unauthorized weapon, a personally maintained long-range precision rifle cleared through the proper channels. When she left, her last post logged in her personal equipment manifest in the administrative records that nobody at FOB Kamara had bothered to open. It was in a case that looked like an equipment bag. It had been sitting under her cot since day one. She had not brought it because she expected a fight. She had brought it because her grandfather taught her that preparation is not pessimism. Preparation is honesty about the world. The night before convoy day, Naomi did not sleep well. Not because she was afraid. Fear she had learned is a signal, and she had learned to receive signals without being controlled by them. She didn't sleep well because her mind was running calculations she couldn't quiet. Wind projection for the northern pass based on the past week's patterns. Angle of approach from the three most tactically significant ridge positions. Response time from lead vehicle to rear if the front of the column took the first hit. How long 8 minutes actually is when the world is collapsing at a rate that outpaces human reaction. 8 minutes. She kept coming back to that number without knowing why. It felt like an answer to a question she hadn't been asked yet. She got up at 04:30, ran through her pre-mission protocol in complete silence, and had her kit loaded by 05:30. The convoy was scheduled to roll at 0700. She was at the vehicles by 0545. Calloway was already there. He looked at her when she arrived, looked at the case she was carrying, in addition to her medical kit, and said nothing. Then he said, "You doing okay?" "Yes," she said. "You sleep?" "Some." He nodded. He looked like a man who wanted to say something and was making a calculation about whether saying it would help or just add weight to a morning that was already heavy enough. Finally, he said, "I heard your question at the briefing 2 weeks ago about the Northern Pass." She was loading her gear into the rear vehicle. She didn't stop moving. "I know you did. I should have backed you up," he said. "I didn't, and I've been thinking about that." She stopped moving. She turned and looked at him directly the way she looked at things she wanted to see clearly. "Why didn't you?" He didn't look away. "Because Kirka was right there, and I didn't want the problem it would cause." "That's honest," she said. "It was wrong," he said. She held his gaze for another moment. Then she said, "It might not matter. We might drive Road Emerald and nothing happens, and I spend the day feeling foolish about a rifle I brought for no reason." He looked at the case. He looked back at her. "And if it does matter," she turned back to the vehicle and finished loading her gear. "Then stay close to me," she said, "and do what I tell you when I tell you, without asking questions." He was quiet for a moment. "Okay," he said, "just that, okay." The convoy assembled at 0650. 3 vehicles. Kirka in the lead with 4 squad members. Boateng in the command vehicle with Dina Tariq and 2 additional personnel. Naomi and Calloway in the rear vehicle with the driver, a specialist named Graves, who had done this run 11 times and had the particular calm of a man who has made peace with routine. At 0702, the convoy rolled out. The first 40 minutes were exactly what they were classified as low-risk routine, the kind of movement that breeds the particular inattention that comes from things going exactly as expected for so long that the expectation hardens into certainty. Graves drove with one hand. The radio carried Kirka's voice periodically, checkpoints, callouts. Nothing significant. Naomi sat in the rear of the vehicle and looked at the ridge lines. She did not look at the road. She looked at the ridge lines the way her grandfather looked at the hills in the evening, completely still, completely present, not searching for anything specific, allowing what was there to present itself. At the 42-minute mark, something presented itself. It was not dramatic. It was not a sound or a movement or anything that would have registered to most soldiers in most vehicles in this kind of environment. It was an absence, a bird. One of the small desert birds that lived in the rock formations along the eastern ridge should have been visible at the position she was watching. She had seen it or one like it there for the past 3 minutes of approach. It was gone. She said nothing. She reached down and opened the equipment case between her feet. Calloway, sitting beside her, watched her do it without speaking. She checked the rifle in 8 seconds. She had done this 10,000 times. Her hands did not shake. Her breathing was completely even. She set it across her knees, still not raising it, still looking at the ridgeline through the vehicle's rear window. At the 44-minute mark, Graves said, "Approaching the pass, northern choke coming up in about 3 minutes." "Copy," Calloway said. Naomi said nothing. At the 45-minute mark, the lead vehicle entered the blind corridor. At the 45-minute 30-second mark, the IED detonated. The sound arrived before anything else. A concussive compression that was not so much heard as felt a pressure wave that hit the rear vehicle and rattled everything inside it. Graves hit the brakes instinctively, which was the wrong response, but the human one. Then the gunfire started, and it was coming from both ridgelines at once, and in the 3 seconds between the IED detonation and Kirka's voice breaking through the radio, Naomi Ochoa already knew 3 things. The ambush was coordinated, it was pre-planned, and the firing positions were exactly where she had identified them. Kirka's voice: "Contact north and south, I count 15, maybe 20. We are pinned at the choke lead vehicle is down." Then a burst of static. Then the particular silence that arrives after static when you are not sure if the radio has failed or the person transmitting has. Graves had the vehicle stopped and was reaching for his own rifle and saying something, words that Naomi processed but did not respond to because she was already moving. She was out of the rear door in a single motion, staying low, using the vehicle as cover, the rifle up, and her cheek against the stock before her knees had fully settled into position. She found the first position on the eastern ridge in 4 seconds. The distance was 810 meters. She ran the calculation in her head, wind from the northwest 14 miles per hour, based on this morning's reading elevation differential of approximately 60 meters temperature effect on ballistic trajectory, her own heartbeat, which she brought down in 2 controlled breaths to a rate that would not disturb her trigger pull. She breathed out. She fired. The target was down before the sound of the shot finished echoing off the far ridge. Calloway was out of the vehicle beside her, and she heard him say something under his breath. Not words, just a sound, the sound a person makes when they see something that doesn't match the category they've been using. She was already finding the second position. This one was moving a shooter, repositioning along the ridge. Having heard the first shot and understood that something had changed about the tactical situation, he was good. He was adapting. Naomi tracked him, led him by 3 feet, and fired. He stopped moving. Graves behind the vehicle was back on the radio. "Command, this is rear vehicle. We have a shooter engaging from our position. Repeat, we have a shooter engaging from rear." Dina's voice came back immediately. "Rear vehicle, identify who is engaging," Calloway answered before Graves could cower. A pause from the command vehicle. Then Dina's voice, faster now, professional. "Copy that. I'm working the comms. Give me 20 seconds. 20 seconds in a firefight is not 20 seconds. It is a lifetime measured in decisions. Naomi used hers to clear the second position completely. 2 additional threats she had not accounted for who had been sheltered behind the first shooter's position, using him as a screen. She took them both. The eastern ridge went quiet. The western side did not. The western positions had the elevation advantage, and they were directing fire at the middle of the column where Boateng's command vehicle sat exposed. She could hear the impacts, the particular metallic sound of rounds hitting vehicle panels, which is different from rounds hitting personnel, a distinction that her medical brain filed automatically, even as her tactical brain was already calculating the angle she needed to address the western ridge from her current position. It wasn't possible from where she was. The vehicle was in the way. She moved. She came around the front of the rear vehicle across 12 feet of open ground to a low rock formation on the road's northern edge that gave her the angle she needed. Calloway moved with her, covering her crossing with his own rifle, and she registered that without acknowledging it, the fact that he had made a decision to protect her movement without being told, which meant he had been watching her work and understood what she was doing well enough to support it. From the rock formation, the western ridge opened up to here. She found 3 positions. She addressed them in order of threat priority, not geographic order. The one with the best angle on the command vehicle went first. Then the one with the rate of fire suggesting an automatic weapon. Then the third, who had already started to shift position in response to the first 2. 6 shots, 6 targets addressed. The western ridge reduced its fire volume by 2/3 in under 90 seconds. Then Dina's voice came through the radio with a controlled urgency that told Naomi she had found something. "I've got enemy comms. They're calling for reinforcements. 8 additional personnel. Northern staging area, ETA, approximately 4 minutes. 4 minutes. 8 more threats, and the lead vehicle still down, and the convoy still pinned. Calloway heard it too. He looked at her. "We need to move the column." "Boateng needs to make that call," she said, and was already back on the trigger. Boateng's voice on the radio was steadier than she expected. "All vehicles prepare to push through. The choke lead vehicle is disabled. We bypass and push to checkpoint Delta. Akauer, I need that ridge clear." "Working on it," she said, and she was. There were 4 more active positions on the western ridge. She cleared them in the time it took Graves to bring the rear vehicle around the disabled lead vehicle, which was burning at the front of the column, and Kirka's voice came back on the radio, different now, stripped of the theatrical confidence that had characterized every transmission she'd heard from him before this moment. "We have 2 wounded in my vehicle. Critically, we need the medic at the lead vehicle now." And here was the thing that no training scenario, no simulation, no briefing room assessment had ever fully captured: the moment when a person is required to be 2 things at once. When the skill that is recognized and the skill that is invisible are both needed simultaneously, and the world suddenly cannot afford to dismiss either one. Naomi Akauer was still behind the rifle. There were still threats on that ridge. And there were 2 critically wounded soldiers in the lead vehicle who needed a combat medic. She made the calculation in the space between 2 heartbeats. She handed the rifle to Calloway. "Eastern ridge is clear. Western positions there are 2 remaining here and here." She described them with coordinates precise enough that he went still. "Do not let them re-establish. I'll be at the lead vehicle." "I've never shot at that range," he said. "You don't need to," she said. "You need to make them keep their heads down." "There's a difference." He looked at the rifle. He looked at her. He nodded. She grabbed her medical kit and ran. The lead vehicle was 60 meters ahead. The ground between her and it was exposed, and there were still rounds coming from the northern staging area. The reinforcements Dina had flagged arriving on the early edge of that 4-minute window. She heard 2 impacts close enough that she felt the air displacement, and she did not stop running. She did not stop running because stopping was not a decision that was available to her. She reached the lead vehicle and went to work. 2 soldiers down. One with a chest wound that had already caused significant collapse of the right lung. One with a leg wound that was arterial, the blood pressure of it telling her she had perhaps 3 minutes before the loss became irreparable. She worked. She did not think about the ridge. She did not think about Calloway. She did not think about the reinforcements or the radio traffic or the sound of the firefight continuing around her. She thought about exactly what her hands were doing and what her hands needed to do next, and she moved through it with the same precision, in the same absence of wasted motion that had characterized everything she had done for 14 days on a base where nobody was watching. Kirka was beside her. She registered that. He was applying pressure to the leg wound where she had directed him, his hands doing exactly what she told him without hesitation, without the question she might have expected from a man who had spent 2 weeks making clear she was beneath his consideration. He did not say anything unnecessary. He just worked. At the 6-minute mark, Dina's voice on the radio: "Enemy reinforcements are engaging. I count 8 on approach from the north staging area." At the 6-minute 30-second mark, Naomi stabilized the chest wound enough to turn her full attention to the arterial bleed. At the 7-minute mark, Calloway's voice on the radio, strained but controlled: "I've got eyes on 6 of the 8 reinforcements. 2 have gone to ground. I can't find their position." At the 7-minute 20-second mark, Naomi tied off the arterial repair and looked at Kirka. "Hold this, exactly this pressure. Do not let go." He held it. He did not let go. She picked up the rifle she had left behind the disabled vehicle when she arrived at the casualty site, not her own, one of the squad's at different weight and balance that her hands adjusted to in 4 seconds, and she came around the front of the lead vehicle and found the 2 positions Calloway couldn't locate. She found them because she had already identified them from the satellite imagery 11 days ago. Because she had memorized them. Because preparation is not pessimism. Preparation is honesty about the world. 2 shots. 2 positions eliminated. And then for the first time since the IED detonated at the 45-minute 30-second mark, the desert went quiet. Not completely quiet. There was still the fire in the lead vehicle. There was still radio traffic. There was still Kirka saying her name once in a voice she had never heard from him before, not commanding, Not dismissive, but something raw and unprocessed, something that sounded like a man who has just seen something that destroyed a belief he didn't know he was carrying. 8 minutes and 14 seconds had passed since the first detonation. 32 hostile threats. The convoy was alive. Naomi Akure lowered the rifle, walked back to the lead vehicle, and went back to work on the two soldiers who needed her. Because the fight was over and the work was not. Because she was a combat medic, and that had never stopped being true, not for 1 second of the 8 minutes that had just happened. Calloway came up beside her a few minutes later. He handed her back her rifle without saying anything. Then he said 810 meters, first shot. Yes, she said without looking up. With a rifle you weren't supposed to have. I was always supposed to have it, she said. Someone just forgot to read the manifest. He was quiet. Then he said, I stayed close. I did what you said. I know, she said. You did good. And that in the specific economy of language that people use when they are running on adrenaline and relief and something that hasn't fully resolved itself into feeling yet, was everything that needed to be said. The convoy pushed to checkpoint Delta with the two wounded soldiers stabilized in the rear vehicle. Dina maintained communications throughout. Boateng called in the contact report with a steadiness in his voice that cost him something. She could hear the effort it was taking to keep his voice at that frequency. And Kirka rode in the rear vehicle beside the soldiers Naomi had kept alive, and he did not speak for the entire journey to the checkpoint. He just looked at the soldiers. Then he looked at his hands, still holding the pressure she had told him to hold, doing exactly what she had asked, the way a person does when they have just discovered the limits of what they thought they knew. The desert around them was indifferent, as it always is. It did not register what had happened there. It did not mark the ground. But the people in those vehicles carried it. Every single one of them. In the particular way that truth carries itself once it has finally been seen, not lightly, not easily, but completely. And it was only the beginning of what would have to be reckoned with. Checkpoint Delta was a converted supply station 12 kilometers east of the ambush site. And by the time the convoy rolled through its gate, word had already moved ahead of them, the way bad news always does, faster than the vehicles carrying it, arriving before anyone was ready to receive it properly. The base medic at Delta, a young specialist named Ortega, came out to meet them with a kit and stopped when he saw Naomi's stabilization work on the two casualties. He stood there for a full 3 seconds, looking at the chest seal and the arterial repair before he said anything. What he said was, "Who did this?" "She did," Calloway said from directly behind him. Ortega looked at Naomi. She was already moving to the second casualty to reassess vitals, her hands doing their work with the same unhurried precision they always had, the same economy of motion that looked effortless from the outside and was the product of 10,000 hours of practice on the inside. "Advanced skills pipeline?" Ortega asked. "Yes," she said without looking up. "These two are alive because of the chest seal alone," he said. "Tension pneumo would have finished him in another 4 minutes." "I know," she said. "That's why I did it first." Ortega looked at Calloway again, the unspoken question obvious. Calloway just shook his head slightly. Not a denial, more like a signal that the explanation was longer than the moment allowed for. Kirka had not spoken since the convoy left the ambush site. He stood outside the vehicles with his arms at his sides and his jaw set in the specific configuration of a man who is processing something that doesn't have a category yet. His two squad members who had been in the lead vehicle were on stretchers, now alive, both of them, and he looked at them the way a person looks at something they almost lost without knowing they were losing it. Boateng came to stand beside him. He didn't say anything immediately. He looked at the vehicles, at the damage, at the missing lead vehicle that had been left burning at the choke point, at the dried blood on the rear vehicle's door that told a story without requiring words. Then he said quietly, "She flagged the northern pass 14 days ago." Kirka said nothing. "I noted it and moved on," Boateng said. His voice was not self-pitying. It was the voice of a man conducting an honest audit of a decision he made and cannot unmake. The threat assessment was low. The ISR didn't support it. Those were real factors. But so was she. Kirka turned and looked at where Naomi was working with the Ortega on the casualty assessment. Then he looked back at Boateng. "How many did she take down?" Calloway counted 32. "I'm going to have to verify that in the after action." Kirka was quiet for a long moment. 8 minutes, he said. 8 minutes and 14 seconds, Boateng said. I had my watch on it from the first shot. Something moved across Kirka's face that wasn't quite any single emotion. It was the composite expression of a person whose entire working model of a situation has just been replaced by reality, and the replacement is not comfortable, and is not fast, and does not spare you anything. I called her support staff, he said. It wasn't a confession exactly. It was more like a man reading something back to himself out loud to confirm it actually happened. Yes, Boateng said. Kirka didn't say anything more. He walked toward the casualties, sat down on the ground beside them, and stayed there. Inside the checkpoint's communications room, Dina Tariq was already on a secure channel uploading her intercept data and the contact report. She worked quickly, methodically, the way she always worked, but there was an edge to her efficiency today that hadn't been there before, a kind of controlled urgency that comes from having been right about something and watching the consequences of being right land on people you care about. The duty officer on the other end of the channel asked her to repeat the casualty figures. She repeated them. He asked her to repeat the threat count. She repeated that too. There was a pause on the line that was longer than normal communications delay, and then he said, "And the neutralizations, who is the reporting shooter?" Dina looked through the communications room window at Naomi, who was now sitting on a supply crate outside her medical kit, open on her knees as she restocked it from Ortega's supplies, with the methodical calm of someone who has not yet allowed herself to stop moving, because stopping moving means feeling everything she has been holding at operational distance for the past 3 hours. "Combat medic Naomi Akur," Dina said. "Second platoon, FOB Kamara." Another pause. Classification on her rifle. Personally maintained long-range precision rifle. Cleared through proper channels. Logged in her personal equipment manifest. The manifest we have on file here shows her as support staff. Dina's voice did not change pitch. "Then your file is incomplete," she said. "I'd suggest updating it." She ended the transmission and went to find Naomi. Naomi was still on the supply crate when Dina came outside. The restocking was finished. It had been finished for several minutes, but she was still sitting there, her hands resting on her open kit, looking at nothing in particular, or at everything at once, which from the outside looks the same way. Dina sat down beside her and did not say anything immediately. That was one of the things Naomi had come to value about Dina Tariq. She understood that silence is not emptiness. It is sometimes the most precise form of communication available. After a moment, Naomi said, "The chest seal patient, his oxygen saturation was at 78 when I sealed it. By the time we reached Delta, it was 91. "That's good," Dina said. "It should have been better. I was working with one hand compromised for part of it." She looked at her right hand. There was a cut across the palm from broken glass she had no memory of when it happened, which was normal, the body's triage system at work during high-stress response. "I need to clean this." "Naomi, it's fine, it's not deep." "Naomi." Dina's voice was different now. Not softer exactly, but more direct, the way a person speaks when they've decided that the professional register has run out of room for what needs to be said. "You just ended a coordinated ambush that was staged at the exact position you identified 2 weeks ago. You kept 2 soldiers alive who would not have survived without you. You did both of those things simultaneously in 8 minutes under fire." Naomi said nothing. "How are you?" Dina asked. The question landed differently than questions usually land. Naomi looked at her, and for a moment the precision and the stillness and the absolute operational composure that had characterized every interaction Dina had observed over the past 3 weeks showed its seam, a small, nearly invisible seam, the kind that only appears when a person has been holding something tightly for a very long time. "I'm okay," Naomi said. "That's not what I asked." Naomi looked back at her hands. Then she said, "My grandfather used to say that the moment after a shot is the most dangerous moment, because you've been entirely focused outward, and then suddenly it's over, and everything you pushed aside to make the focus possible comes back at once." "What comes back?" A pause. "The weight of it," Naomi said. "Knowing that people are alive because of what you did. Knowing what it kind, both of those things at the same time." Dina was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Both of those things are true." "Yes," Naomi said, "they are." They sat together for another few minutes. Then Naomi closed her kit, stood up and said, "I need to check on the casualties again before they're transported." She went back to work. Dina watched her go and did not say what she was thinking. which was that she had never in her career met anyone quite like Naomi Akur, and that the base they were returning to had no idea what it had been carrying in its midst for 3 weeks, and that the reckoning that was coming was going to be uncomfortable for a lot of people who had made a lot of easy assumptions. The transport helicopter arrived at Checkpoint Delta at 1340 hours. The two critical casualties were loaded, both stable, both expected to survive, one of them conscious enough to grip Naomi's hand before he was lifted aboard. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. The grip was enough. Kirka watched the helicopter lift from 15 feet away. When it was gone, he turned and walked directly to Naomi. Not to Boateng, not to any of his own squad members. To her. He stopped in front of her and stood there for a moment in the specific discomfort of a man who is doing something he has no practice language for. "Sergeant," as she said, "I owe you something," he said. "You don't owe me anything." "Don't do that," he said. His voice was sharp, not at her, at the situation, at himself. "Don't make it easier than it is. I spent 2 weeks making sure you knew you weren't considered not really not in the way that matters, and you saved my people. I need to say that out loud." She looked at him. She did not make it easier. She waited. "I was wrong," he said, "not just about you, about the way I run my unit, the way I decide who matters before I've actually looked at what they can do." He paused. "That's a harder thing to say than it sounds." "I know," she said. "The Northern Pass. You saw it." "Yes. And I made you feel like it wasn't worth saying." "You made me feel like it wasn't worth saying out loud," she said. "That's different. I said it anyway." He absorbed that. "You did." He looked at the space where the helicopter had been. "What would have happened if I had listened 2 weeks ago? If Boateng had listened?" "Different ISR tasking on that ridge," she said. "Probably, which might have given us early warning, which might have changed the convoy routing. Or at least the formation." She paused. 2 weeks ago, those soldiers would have had better odds." Kirka's jaw tightened. He nodded once, very slowly, the way a person nods when they are accepting something they cannot put down afterward. "I hear you," he said. It was not an apology. It was something more specific than an apology. It was acknowledgement, which is the thing that actually changes behavior, as opposed to the thing that just temporarily relieves the discomfort of having behaved badly. Then he said, "What do you need right now from me? What do you need?" She thought about that. Then she said, "I need my after-action report to reflect an accurate account of my training and qualifications, and I need it to reflect the tactical observation I submitted in the briefing 2 weeks ago and the response it received." He held her gaze. "That's going to be uncomfortable for some people." "Yes," she said, "it is. Including me." "Especially you," she said. "Not cruelly, just accurately." He nodded again. "Okay," he said. "Okay." The return convoy to FOB Kamara departed Checkpoint Delta at 1520 hours, running a different route. Boateng had rerouted them immediately upon the contact report, which was the decision he should have made 2 weeks ago, based on the observation Naomi had submitted, but which he was making now with the particular sharpness of a man who has learned something at a cost he is still calculating. The ride back was quiet, not the comfortable quiet of routine, the charged, full quiet of people sitting with something real. Calloway rode in the rear vehicle again, across from Naomi. At some point in the middle of the journey, he said without preamble, "When you handed me the rifle, at the casualty site, and told me about the 2 positions." "Yes," she said, "the coordinates you gave me. I've never heard someone give coordinates from memory that fast, without a map, without a device. I memorized them from the imagery," she said. 11 days ago," he said. 12 by that point. He was quiet for a moment. "That's not normal," he said. "What's normal?" He almost smiled. "Almost. Fair point." Then after another silence, he said, "The first shot, 810 meters. I was watching through my scope when you fired, and I saw the impact, and I couldn't." He stopped, started again. "I want you to know that I'm going to think about that shot for the rest of my life, not because it was impressive, because of what it meant, because of what it took. The fact that you were that still, in that moment, with everything happening around you." Naomi looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "My grandfather used to say that stillness isn't the absence of feeling. It's what happens when you've made peace with the feeling long enough to work through it." Calloway nodded slowly. I think I understand that now, he said. I didn't before today. The convoy reached Phoebe Kamara at 1742 hours. The gate opened and the vehicles pulled through, and the soldiers who were running the late afternoon shift on the base stopped what they were doing and looked the way people look when something has happened that hasn't been announced yet, but that the faces of the people coming through the gate make undeniable. Word moves fast on a forward operating base. By the time the vehicles had parked and the personnel had dismounted, there were already clusters of soldiers near the motor pool who had heard pieces of the contact report and were trying to assemble them into a coherent picture. The pieces did not assemble neatly because the coherent picture was not a comfortable one, and the mind tends to resist pictures that require it to reorganize things it has already filed. The piece that moved fastest was the one about Naomi Akor, not because anyone announced it, not because anyone made a speech, but because Calloway told two people in the motor pool, and Ortega had radioed ahead from Checkpoint Delta, and Dina's contact report had been filed through official channels already, and those three streams of information moving through the base simultaneously created a kind of inevitability. A moment where the story that everyone had agreed on, the simple story about the combat medic who was support staff, collided head-on with the story that had actually happened today. Collisions like that are not pleasant. They require everyone who was comfortable in the old story to do a kind of reckoning with themselves, which most people do not do gracefully, and some people do not do at all. Naomi walked to the medical bay. She did not walk through the center of the base, not because she was avoiding people, but because the medical bay was on the eastern edge, and that was the direct route. She carried her kit and her rifle case and her notebook, and she moved through the base the same way she always moved through it, purposefully, quietly, without performing anything. She passed three separate groups of soldiers who stopped talking when they saw her coming and did not start again until she had passed. She registered this without reacting to it. In the medical bay, she set her kit down, sat in the chair, and wrote in her notebook for 7 minutes. Not about the ambush, not about the shots or the casualties or the 8 minutes. She wrote the names of the two soldiers who had been medevaced from Checkpoint Delta, and beneath each name, she wrote their vitals at stabilization, their vitals at Delta, and the intervention she had performed. Clinical notes, the kind of documentation that exists not for drama, but for continuity of care. For the next medic who picks up where she leaves off for the record, that makes sure those two men get exactly the treatment they need. Then she closed the notebook, put it away, and cleaned the cut on her right hand with the careful attention she would have given anyone else's injury. Boateng knocked on the medical bay door at 18:15 hours. He waited for her to acknowledge before he entered, which he had not done the first time they interacted in this space. Small things change first. He came in and stood with his hands behind his back and looked at her directly. "How's the hand?" "Clean, shallow, it'll be fine." He nodded. "I filed the contact report," he said. "Full account, including the ISR gap, the pre-convoy observation you submitted, and the response it received." He paused. "Including my response." She looked at him. "You didn't have to do it that way." "Yes, I did," he said. "The accurate report is the one where a combat medic in my unit identified a tactical vulnerability that I dismissed, and then that vulnerability was exploited in exactly the way she predicted. And 32 people on the other side of that vulnerability are no longer a threat because she was prepared when no one else was." He stopped. "That's the accurate report. Anything else is a comfortable lie." She was quiet for a moment. "What happens now?" she asked. "Someone at a level above mine is going to read that report," he said, "and then someone above them. And then some decisions are going to get made about how a combat medic with your qualifications ended up classified as support staff on a forward operating base in Djibouti, and about the ISR coverage on Route Emerald's northern pass." "That too," he said. "That conversation is already happening." She looked at her hands. Then she looked up at him. "Lieutenant," she said, "those two soldiers, the ones on the helicopter, they're in surgery," he said. "Last update I received, both are expected to make a full recovery." Something moved through her expression, not relief exactly because she had already known the odds were good based on her own assessment, but something more personal than professional calculation. The particular thing that happens when you have made a decision under the worst possible conditions and held it together and done the work, and the work turns out to have been enough. "Good," she said. "Yes," he said. "Good." He left without saying anything more, and she sat in the medical bay for a long time after that, in the quiet that had become familiar to her, the quiet that most people on this base had mistaken for absence. It was not absence. It had never been absence. Kirka came to the medical bay at 1900 hours. He did not knock. That particular social shift had not happened for him yet, or perhaps he was not the kind of man who knocked. And the thing that had changed was not his instincts, but his intentions. He came in and stood in the middle of the room and looked at her with the expression of a man who has been rehearsing something and has decided to abandon the rehearsal. "I told my squad," he said, "everything. What you did, what I did, what I said about you, what I let others say. I told them straight in front of all of them." She looked at him. "How did they respond?" "Graves cried," he said. "He was your driver. He said he watched you get out of that vehicle under fire and run to the lead position, and he thought you were dead and then you weren't, and he couldn't explain it." He paused. "The rest of them were quiet, the good kind of quiet, the kind where people are thinking. And you," she said. He looked at his hands. The same hands that had held pressure on a soldier's leg, wound exactly the way she told him to for as long as she needed him to without question. "I'm still working through it," he said, "but I'm working through it honestly. That's new for me." She nodded. "That's enough," she said. He looked like he wanted to say more. Like there were things backed up behind what he'd already said, things that didn't have clean language yet and were going to take time to find it. But he was also a man who understood that not everything needs to be said tonight, and that sometimes the most respectful thing you can do for another person is not fill all the available silence. "Good night, Akaur," he said. "Good night, Sergeant," she said. And the door closed and she was alone again in the medical bay with the quiet she had always lived inside, the quiet that had always been full of things that nobody bothered to look for because they had decided in advance that looking was unnecessary. Outside foe, Kamara was doing what it always did, absorbing the day, adjusting to the new weight of what had happened, finding its new center of gravity. There were conversations in the common area, in the vehicle bay, in the communications room. There were people reading the contact report or hearing pieces of it. There were soldiers looking at the eastern edge of the base and thinking about the woman in the medical bay in a way they had not thought about her 2 weeks ago, or 2 days ago, or even 2 hours ago. The base was adjusting slowly, imperfectly, the way things adjust when reality forces them to. Naomi Akur opened her notebook one more time. She wrote one line at the bottom of the last page she had used. Not a tactical note, not a clinical entry, something personal in the private language between herself and the grandfather who had taught her everything that mattered. She wrote "stillness held." Then she closed the notebook, turned off the light, and let the night have its quiet. But she was already thinking about the morning, about the briefing that would come, about the questions that would be asked of her in official settings by people who had not read her file and were now very motivated to understand what was in it, about the 2 soldiers in surgery whose recovery she intended to track personally, about the gap in ISR coverage on Route Emerald that had not yet been officially closed and that needed to be before any vehicle moved through that corridor again. She was thinking about the work because the work was what remained. The work was what had always remained. And she was above all else a person who knew how to do it. What nobody at FOB Kamara had yet fully grasped, though they were beginning to, was that the 8 minutes in the desert had not changed who Naomi Akur was. They had simply made it impossible to look away from who she had always been. And that distinction was going to matter more than anyone yet understood. The morning after the ambush, FOB Kamara woke up different. Not louder, not more dramatic. Different in the way that a room is different after someone has rearranged the furniture in the dark. Everything is technically in the same place, but the balance has shifted and your body knows it before your mind does, and you move through the space more carefully because you are no longer completely sure what to expect from it. Reveille came at 05:30, same as always. The generators ran, the mess hall opened, soldiers moved through their morning routines with the automatic efficiency of people who have learned that routine is what keeps you functional when the ground has shifted beneath you. But the conversations were different. The silences between the conversations were different. And the way that people looked at the eastern edge of the base toward the medical bay was different in a way that nobody was announcing, but everybody felt. Naomi was already awake when Reveille sounded. She had been awake since 04:30, sitting on the edge of her cot, running through the morning's calculations the way she always did, the way her grandfather had taught her, not anxiety, not rumination, but deliberate preparation. She had already reviewed the night's updates on the two medevac soldiers. Both had come through surgery. One was in recovery and had been upgraded from critical to serious. The other, the chest wound, had been upgraded to stable. She had read both updates, twice absorbed them fully, and moved on. She showered, dressed, and was in the medical bay restocking the final items from the previous day's consumption by 0515. When the base started moving around her at 0530, she was already operational. Graves knocked on the medical bay door at 0600. He stood in the doorway with his hat in his hands, which was not a military posture. It was a human one, the posture of someone who is not here in an official capacity. "Specialist Graves," she said. "Ma'am," he said. Then he seemed to realize that wasn't quite right either. She wasn't an officer, and he adjusted. "A cure," he stopped. He looked at the hat in his hands. "I drove that vehicle for 11 previous runs on Route Emerald. I never looked at the ridgeline the way you were looking at it." "That wasn't your job," she said. "I know," he said, "but it was yours, and you were doing it the whole time, and I wasn't paying attention to the right things." She looked at him. He was young, mid-20s maybe, with the kind of face that shows everything it feels because it hasn't yet learned to manage that. He was not crying now, but he had been recently the particular redness around the eyes that doesn't fully resolve for hours. "You drove well under fire," she said. "Stopping was instinct. It was the right call. You held position and kept communication open. That mattered." He looked at her like she had said something unexpected. "I was scared," he said. "Everyone was scared," she said. "That's not a disqualifying condition." He stood there for another moment, then nodded, put his hat back on, and left. She watched him go and thought about the specific courage it takes to walk into a room and say you were scared to a person you barely know just because the thing that was not said needed to be said. At 0730, Boateng called a full platoon briefing. Not a combat briefing, a sit-down mandatory attendance, every member of 2nd Platoon in the room, which in itself was unusual enough to charge the air before anyone said a word. Naomi sat in her usual seat, 2nd row far right, mechanical pencil, notebook closed. Kirka sat in the front row, which was not unusual. What was unusual was the quality of his stillness. Damon Kirka was not a still person by nature. He was energy and momentum and volume. But he sat that morning with his hands flat on his knees and his eyes forward, and something in his posture that was not defeat, it was accountability, which looks similar from the outside but comes from a completely different internal place. Boateng stood at the front of the room and looked at his unit for a long moment before he spoke. "Yesterday," he said, "Route Emerald, Northern Pass. I'm going to talk about what happened, and then I'm going to talk about what happened before it happened, and I need everyone in this room to hear both parts." He walked through the ambush chronologically. The IED, the contact, the 8 minutes. He was precise and he was complete, and he did not soften anything. When he got to the casualty count, 2 wounded, both expected to survive, he paused and the room absorbed that information in the particular collective way that military units absorb near misses, which involves a kind of involuntary gratitude that sits right next to the recognition of how close the other thing was. Then he said, 14 days before the convoy combat medic Achir submitted a verbal tactical observation at an operational briefing. She identified a gap in ISR coverage at the northern choke point on Route Emerald and flagged it as a potential ambush staging position. The room was completely still. "That observation was not action," Boateng said. "It was noted and set aside. I set it aside. The reasons I had for doing that were real. The threat assessment was low. The ISR gap was not corroborated by any other intelligence stream, and I made a judgment call." He paused. "I made the wrong one." Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Dina Tarek submitted a signals intelligence anomaly report 40 hours before the convoy that corroborated a pattern shift in the northern sector. That report was also set aside. Another pause. Also wrong. Kirka's hands on his knees did not move. In the absence of those 2 observations being actioned, Boateng said combat medic at Kaur took it upon herself to prepare individually. She studied the route imagery. She identified the 6 primary firing positions that were used in yesterday's ambush. She carried a personally maintained precision rifle in her equipment manifest, which was legally cleared and properly documented, and she used it to neutralize 32 hostile threats in 8 minutes and 14 seconds, while simultaneously providing critical trauma care to two casualties that would not have survived without her intervention. He stopped. He looked at the room. "I want to be very clear about something," he said. "What she did yesterday was not luck. It was not instinct. It was the direct result of preparation that she conducted in spite of, not because of the environment this unit created for her." She raised her hand in this room and was effectively silenced. She conducted her preparation in isolation because the channels that should have supported it were not available to her. And 32 threats are neutralized, and 2 soldiers are alive because she did it anyway. From the front row, Kirka said without turning around, "And I am the reason those channels weren't available to her." The room received that the way a body receives a difficult truth with a physical response that was not quite discomfort and not quite relief, but something in between. Boateng looked at Kirka. "We're not here to assign individual blame," he said. "I know, Kirka said. "I'm not doing it for the room. I'm doing it because it's accurate." He turned around, then turned his chair so he was facing the platoon, which meant he was facing Naomi, and he held that position without looking away from her. "I called her support staff in front of all of you, and you laughed, and I let you laugh, and that told all of you that she didn't need to be taken seriously. That's on me. That's a leadership failure with my name on it." Naomi held his gaze. She did not look away. She did not perform graciousness or discomfort. She simply received what he was saying the way she received everything, with complete attention and without drama. "What changes," Kirka said, turning back to face the room, "is everything that created that situation. Starting today." Boateng nodded. "Starting today," he said, "any observation submitted by any member of this platoon gets documented, assessed, and responded to in writing. No more noted and moved on. No more unofficial hierarchies that tell people their input has a lower value before it's even been evaluated." He looked around the room. "We were lucky yesterday. 2 people are in recovery right now who should statistically be dead. We do not get to be lucky twice and call it a system." The briefing ended at 08:20. Soldiers filed out, and the conversations that had been suspended for the 45 minutes of the briefing resumed with a different quality than they'd had before, less fragmented, less speculative, more honest, in the specific way that things become honest when the official version of events and the actual version of events have been reconciled. Calloway fell into step beside Naomi on the way out. "You okay?" he said. "Yes," she said. Then after a moment, "That was harder to sit through than I expected." He glanced at her. "The part where Boateng said all of it out loud. The part where Kirka said all of it out loud," she said. "Boateng is a lieutenant conducting an after-action. Kirka is a man saying something true that costs him something real. Those are different things." Calloway was quiet for a moment. "Does it change anything for you about how you feel about what happened?" She thought about that honestly, the way she thought about all serious things. "I spent 3 weeks being invisible on purpose," she said. "Not because I chose to be invisible, but because the environment made being visible costly. That doesn't resolve itself because someone says the right words in a briefing." She paused. "But it's a start, and starts matter." He nodded. "Fair," he said. At 1,000 hours, 2 things happened simultaneously that neither Naomi nor anyone else on FOB Kamara had anticipated. The first was a communication from the regional command level that Boateng received on the secure channel in his office. He read it twice, then sat in his chair for a full minute without moving. Then he got up and went to find Naomi. The second was a visitor. Not a visitor to the base, a call patched through the base communications system to the medical bay, which rang at 1:03 hours while Naomi was reviewing his supply inventory. She picked up the handset without knowing what was coming. The voice on the other end was a major she had never spoken to, based out of regional headquarters, who introduced himself efficiently and then said, "We've been reviewing the contact report from yesterday's engagement on Rote Emerald, specifically the after-action submitted by Lieutenant Boateng and the signals intelligence report submitted by Analyst Tariq." A pause. "We've also pulled your personnel file." "I see," she said. "There's a discrepancy," he said, "between your documented qualifications and your current assignment classification." "Yes," she said. "Do you want to tell me about that discrepancy, Corporal Acure?" In your own words. She considered that for exactly 2 seconds. Then she said, "I graduated in the top 3% of the advanced skills pipeline. I completed special operations medical protocols. I am qualified as both a combat medic and a long-range precision shooter. None of those qualifications are reflected in my current classification as support staff. I do not know how the discrepancy originated. I know that it has existed since I arrived at FOB Kamara, and I know that I raised a tactical observation that went unactioned in part because of it. The major was quiet for a moment. Who assigned you the support staff classification at this posting? I would need to review the administrative record to answer that accurately, she said. But I can tell you that no one at FOB Kamara reviewed my full personnel file before or after my arrival. The classification was inherited from the assignment order, and you didn't push back on it. I pushed back on it once, she said. In the briefing room when I submitted the tactical observation. The response I received told me how much leverage I had. She paused. So I prepared differently. Another silence. When the major spoke again, his voice had shifted slightly, not warmer exactly, but more direct. The voice of someone who has just finished processing something and has arrived at a conclusion. I'm going to need you to be available for a formal debrief at the regional headquarters level. That will be scheduled within the next 72 hours. Your transportation and logistics will be handled by this command. Understood, she said. One more thing, he said. Yes. The two soldiers from the casualty report, Peterson and Wald, the chest wound and the arterial bleed. Yes. Peterson regained full consciousness this morning. He asked the nursing staff at the medical facility to contact the medic who worked on him at the ambush site. A pause. He wanted to say thank you. She stood in the medical bay with the handset in her hand and said nothing for a moment. Then she said, Tell him he's welcome. Tell him to rest. I will, the major said, and ended the call. Boateng knocked and entered 30 seconds later. He looked at her. You just got the call. Yes, she said. I got the written communication, he said. Regional Command is reviewing the personnel classification discrepancy. There will likely be a formal inquiry into how the assignment order was generated. He paused. That process is going to go up the chain. It's going to implicate administrative decisions made well above my level. I know, she said. It's also going to result in a formal review of your qualifications and a reclassification, he said, which should have happened before you ever arrived at this base. She looked at him. How long does a process like that take? Weeks, possibly months at the formal level. He paused. But the effective change, the way this unit treats you, the way your observations are received, that happens now. I can make that happen now. You already did, she said. This morning. He nodded. Then he said something she did not expect. I looked up your grandfather, Salim Machour, former marksman, Algerian National Army, decorated service record. She went very still. It's in your background documentation, he said. The part that nobody read. He paused. He trained you. Yes, she said. From how old? 9, she said. Boateng absorbed that. He looked at the medical bay, at the precisely arranged supplies, the clinical notes, the notebook on the side table with its worn cover. Then he looked at her. He would have been proud yesterday, he said. It was the thing that went through her defenses, cleanly and without warning, the way a well-placed shot goes through exactly the gap it was aimed at. Not because Boateng knew Salim Machour, or because his assessment carried the weight of someone who had witnessed all 14 years of what the old marksman had built in his granddaughter, but because it was true. And truth in Naomi Akour's world had always been the thing she responded to most completely. She breathed, slowly, one breath. Yes, she said, he would have. Boateng left. She stood in the medical bay for another moment, and then she went back to work. At 1200 hours, the mess hall dynamic had already changed in the specific, unannounced, socially organic way that hierarchies shift inside closed communities. It did not announce itself. Nobody made a speech about it. But when Naomi walked into the mess hall for the midday meal, the table arrangement was different in a way that required no commentary. Graves waved her over to a table where 3 of Kirka's squad members were already sitting. She sat down. Nobody made a production of it. Kirka came in 12 minutes later, looked at the table, looked at her, and sat down across the aisle at the adjacent table, not with her, but not at the commanding distance he had always maintained before. The 2 tables ate their meals in parallel, and occasionally a comment or a question crossed the aisle, and nobody noted or celebrated the crossing because it was not the kind of moment that announces itself. It is only the kind of moment that matters. Dina sat down beside Naomi with her tray and said quietly, "The ISR coverage on the Northern Pass has been formally updated. New tasking order went through this morning. The corridor will have continuous coverage starting at 0600 tomorrow." "Good," Naomi said. "3 weeks too late," Dina said. "But it's done now," Naomi said. Dina looked at her. "You're not angry?" "I'm a lot of things," Naomi said. "Angry is in there, but it's not the loudest thing right now." "What's the loudest thing?" Naomi looked around the mess hall at Graves, at the squad members at Kirka, across the aisle at the soldiers who were watching her differently than they had watched her yesterday, differently than they had watched her for 3 weeks. "Relief," she said, "that the two soldiers are alive. That's the loudest thing." Dina was quiet for a moment. "You know what's going to happen at the regional debrief," she said. "I have some idea. They're going to ask you to speak to what contributed to the tactical situation. The classification, the observation that wasn't actioned, the ISR gap." "I know," Naomi said, and I'll tell the truth," she said, "the same thing I've been doing since I arrived here." She picked up her fork. "It turns out it's not a complicated strategy, it's just a slow one." At 1500 hours, Calloway came to find her with something unexpected. He was carrying a folded piece of paper, and he held it the way people hold things they're not sure about, handing over not reluctantly exactly, but with the specific care of someone who has thought about the gesture longer than the gesture itself requires. "What is this?" she said. "Peterson's squad leader," he said. "The chest wound. His squad leader is here on base. He was on a separate detail during the convoy. He wrote this out this morning after he got the update on Peterson's condition." He set the paper on the table. "He asked me to give it to you." She unfolded it. She read it. It was not long. 7 sentences handwritten, the handwriting of someone who had been taught to write carefully and did not do it often. The content was simple. His soldier was alive. He knew why. He had been told about the ISR observation that went unactioned and what it had cost and what it would have cost if she hadn't prepared independently. He was sorry that the environment had required her to work alone. He was grateful beyond what he could express in 7 sentences. He wanted her to know. She folded the paper and set it down. "You okay?" Calloway asked. "Yes," she said. "Then 7 sentences from a man I've never met is worth more than most of what I've heard in 3 weeks from people I work with every day." "I know," he said. She looked at the folded paper, then she looked at him. "Thank you," she said, "for bringing it." "He didn't know where the medical bay was," Calloway said, "so I showed him." She almost smiled. "You've been showing people things they should have already known how to find," she said, "since day 11. He did look like he was going to smile at that, the genuine kind, the kind that arrives without permission. "Yeah," he said, "I'm working on being faster about it." The afternoon settled into the rhythm of a base that is processing something difficult and has decided to process it through work rather than through avoidance, which is the healthiest thing a military unit can do and is not as common as it should be. Naomi ran her afternoon medical checks. She updated her protocol documentation. She filed a formal written record of the 2 interventions from the previous day, the chest seal and the arterial repair, in the base medical log, which created an official record that had not previously existed because in the chaos of the ambush and the rush to checkpoint Delta, the paperwork had gone undone. She did not file it because anyone asked her to. She filed it because it was the correct thing to do, and because 2 soldiers' recovery plans would benefit from having the complete record of what was done to stabilize them, and because her grandfather had taught her that the work you do when no one is requiring you to do it is the work that defines your character. At 1830 hours, something happened that nobody on FOB Kamara had planned for, and that changed the weight of the evening in a way that was difficult to define precisely, but impossible not to feel. The base communications officer came to the medical bay and said that there was a call waiting on the secured medical channel. Not regional command this time, not an administrative inquiry. The call was from the medical recovery facility where Peterson and Wald had been transported. Wald was on the line. She picked up the handset, and the voice on the other end was rough from anesthesia and weak from blood loss. And it said before she could say anything, "Is this ACAR?" "Yes," she said. "They told me what you did." And he said, "Both things, the shooting and the other thing, the thing with my leg." "I did my job," she said. You ran 60 meters through active fire to do your job, he said. She didn't say anything. I used to run track, he said. The voice was faint, winding down towards sleep or medication or both, but the intent behind it was completely awake. I know what 60 meters feels like, especially when people are shooting at you. How are you feeling, she said. Like someone rebuilt my leg from parts, he said. They tell me I'll keep it. Full function. A pause longer this time. Because of what you did in the field, the initial repair. Good, she said. Rest. Do everything they tell you. A car, he'd said. Yes. Whatever they're classifying you as over their support staff or whatever, that's wrong. The voice was fading, but the words were precise. I don't know what the right word is, but it's not that. She stood in the medical bay with the handset in her hand, and the evening going quiet outside, and the weight of the day settling around her, and for a moment the precision and the preparation and the philosophy her grandfather had spent a lifetime building in her reduced itself to something very simple, very human, very impossible to argue with. Rest, Walt, she said. Yes, ma'am, he said, and the line went quiet. She set the handset down. She stood in the medical bay for a long time, not moving, not writing, not working. Just present in the moment, the way the old marksman from the mountains of Algeria had taught her to be present completely without reservation, without looking ahead or behind. Then she opened her notebook. She turned to a fresh page, and she wrote one line in the private language between herself and the grandfather she still talked to every day, even though he had been gone for 6 years. She wrote, "They are beginning to see." She closed the notebook. She did not need to write what came next, because what came next was not a conclusion. It was a beginning wearing the face of a correction, and corrections real ones. The kind that happen at the level of belief rather than behavior do not announce themselves in a single evening. They accumulate. They compound. They do what water does to stone, which is not dramatic and is not fast, but is in the end irresistible. And FOB Kamara was only now beginning to understand what it had been standing next to all along. The formal debrief summons arrived at 06:15 the following morning, printed on regional command letterhead, and delivered to Boateng's office by a communications runner who handed it over with the slightly elevated attention of someone who understands they are carrying something that matters. Boateng read it again, and walked directly to the medical bay. Naomi was already at her station. She had been there since 05:30. The supplies were inventoried, the morning medical checks were scheduled, and her notebook was open to a fresh page with 2 items already written on it. Follow-up vitals projections for Peterson and Wald based on the previous evening's status updates, and a question she intended to ask at the debrief about the administrative origin of the support staff classification. Boateng set the summons on the table in front of her. She read it without picking it up. 72 hours, she said. They moved it up, he said. 48. They want you at regional headquarters day after tomorrow, 800. Why faster? He sat down across from her, which he had never done before in this room. Always standing, always positioned at the edge of conversations rather than inside them. The sitting down was a small thing. It was not a small thing. Because he said someone at the regional level pulled the full personnel file last night. Not just the assignment order. The complete file, advanced skills, graduation record, special operations, medical protocols, certification, the marksmanship qualification scores. He paused. Your scores from the advanced skills precision component are in the 97th percentile of everyone who has ever completed that pipeline. She looked at him. The question they are now asking at the regional level, and he said, is not just how you ended up classified as support staff. The question is how someone with those numbers ended up at a forward operating base in Djibouti without a single commanding officer being briefed on her full capability profile. That is a much larger question, she said. Yes, he said, it is. She was quiet for a moment, processing the weight of it, not the bureaucratic weight, which she had anticipated, but the human weight underneath it. The fact that the answer to that question, when it was fully traced, was going to reveal a system that had been failing people like her, not once, not accidentally, but structurally, repeatedly, in ways that had cost real outcomes and real lives across a lot of postings that nobody had connected into a pattern until an 8-minute engagement in a desert choke point made the pattern too clear to keep ignoring. Who else got lost in that system, she said. It was not quite a question. Boateng heard the difference. That, he said quietly, is what they're going to try to find out. She looked at the summons again. Then she looked at her notebook, at the two items she had written at 0530, at the discipline and the precision and the preparation that had been her constant companions through 3 weeks of institutional invisibility. "I'll be ready," she said. He stood up to go. Then he stopped. He turned back and said, with the careful deliberateness of a man choosing his words not for effect but for accuracy, "For what it's worth, and I understand it may not be worth much given the sequence of events, you are the best soldier I have had in this unit. Not the best female soldier, not the best medic, the best soldier. And I should have known that 3 weeks ago." She held his gaze. "You know it now," she said. "Yes," he said. "I do." He left. She picked up her pencil and wrote a third item in her notebook. Then she closed it and went to work. The 48 hours between the summons and the debrief were not quiet. They were the particular kind of busy that happens when a base is recalibrating, not dramatically, not all at once, but in the accumulated small moments of adjustment that taken together amount to a fundamental shift in the working reality of a place. The first shift happened in the briefing room at 0900 that morning, when Dina Tariq presented an updated signals intelligence assessment of the northern sector. Naomi attended. She sat in her usual seat. When Dana finished the presentation and asked for questions, 3 soldiers raised their hands before the silence had fully settled, which was 2 more than usually raised hands in a briefing, where the dominant social signal had previously been that questions from certain people were less welcome than from others. One of those hands belonged to Naomi. She asked a technical question about the frequency pattern anomaly Dina had identified 40 hours before the convoy, and whether the new ISR tasking would cover the secondary transmission band that the pattern had originated from. Dina answered in full. Boateng took a note. Nobody looked at Kirka to calibrate their reaction. They just listened, processed, and responded the way a functional unit processes information. It was not a dramatic moment. It was a normal moment. That was precisely what made it significant. The second shift happened at 1100 in the vehicle bay, where Kirka had assembled his squad for a modified equipment review. Naomi was not part of the review. She had her own work. But Calloway told her about it later in the specific way that people report things they witnessed and want witnessed in turn. Kirka had stood in front of his squad and said 3 things. The first was that the medical contingency plan for all future operations involving this unit was being rewritten to integrate the combat medic as a primary tactical asset rather than a rear support function. The second was that any observations submitted by any squad member on any tactical matter would be documented and formally assessed with a written response before any operational decision that affected that observation was finalized. The third thing he said was this: "I set a standard in this unit about who was worth listening to. I said it wrong. We're correcting it now, and the correction starts with me." Calloway had watched the faces of the squad during all 3 of those statements. He told Naomi that nobody laughed, nobody looked sideways, nobody performed skepticism. They just listened. "That's the thing about Kirka," Calloway said. "When he sets the temperature, it changes. He said it wrong the first time, but the same force that said it wrong can set it right." Naomi thought about that for a long time after Calloway left. At 1400 hours, the twist that nobody had anticipated. Boateng called her into his office, not the briefing room, his actual office, the small converted space with the desk and the 2 chairs and the framed map on the wall that she had been in exactly once before. He closed the door. He sat down. He put a printed communication on the desk between them and said, "This came through on the secured channel 20 minutes ago." She read it. It was from the Regional Command Medical Officer addressed to Boateng and copied to the unit administrative record. It was 2 paragraphs. The first paragraph formally corrected her classification from support staff to combat medic advanced, a designation that reflected the full scope of her qualifications, and that changed her operational mandate, her authority within the unit's medical decision-making structure, and her standing in any tactical planning process relevant to medical or personnel risk assessment. The second paragraph was shorter. It stated that, effective immediately, her precision rifle qualification was formally recognized as an active secondary skill to be noted in her operational profile and available for integration into unit tactical planning at the commanding officer's discretion. She read both paragraphs twice. She set the paper down. "It's not the full reclassification," Boateng said. "That process takes longer. But this is the interim correction. It changes your standing here on this base in this unit right now. She looked at the paper. Who initiated this? The regional medical officer, he said. But the summons, the debrief request that came from a Colonel Mercer at the operational command level. I think Mercer read the contact report personally and made some calls. He paused. And I think your file spoke for itself once someone with enough rank actually opened it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, the other people in that pipeline, the ones who ended up misclassified. Mercer's office is already reviewing assignment records, he said. Yours isn't the first case they've found. She absorbed that, the full weight of it, not just her own 3 weeks of institutional invisibility, but the compound weight of however many other soldiers had carried the same thing in silence, had prepared in isolation, had raised hands in briefing rooms and been noted and moved past, had done their jobs without credit, without proper classification, without the leverage that accurate classification gives you in environments where classification is the currency of being heard. Good, she said. Her voice was steady, but there was something behind it that Boateng heard and recognized as something beyond personal relief, something that had a broader geography by him. Naomi, he said. It was the first time he had used her first name. She looked at him. What you did on that road, both things, the shooting and the medical work that's going to be in the training and record. Not just in the after action, in the institutional record. People are going to train on it. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said quietly, my grandfather would have said that's the real work, not the 8 minutes, what the 8 minutes produces afterward. Boateng nodded. He sounds like he was a wise man. He was the wisest person I've ever known, she said, and nobody at any base I've ever been posted to knew his name until yesterday when you looked it up. He received that without deflecting it. I know, he said. I'm sorry it took that long. The afternoon moved through its hours with the particular quality of time that passes when something large has happened and the world is catching up to it, not slowly but not instantaneously, either at the pace of human comprehension, which is faster than bureaucracy and slower than truth. At 1600 hours, Calloway came to the medical bay with Graves and 2 other soldiers from Kirka's squad. They did not come with an agenda. They came in the way that people come to a place when the place has changed its meaning for them, not to mark the change formally, but because the pull of it brought them there. Graves said, we wanted to see how you were doing. She looked at the 4 of them standing in the doorway of the medical bay. She looked at the room she had occupied alone for 3 weeks, the room that had been her preparation space and her thinking space and her place of refuge from the social architecture of a base that had not known what to do with her. Come in, she said. They came in. The room was not large enough for 5 people without rearranging things slightly, and they rearranged things slightly and nobody made a production of it. One of the soldiers, a corporal named Reyes, whom she had spoken to exactly twice both times in strictly medical context, said, my sister is trying to get into the advanced skills pipeline. She's been told it's not realistic for someone with her profile. Naomi looked at him. What's her profile? A female, 5'4", civilian athletic background. She was a competitive long-distance runner in college. Tell her to apply, Naomi said. The pipeline doesn't care about height. It cares about sustained precision under physical and mental stress. A long-distance runner's relationship with discomfort and with sustained performance over time is a direct qualification, not a liability. Reyes looked at her. Then he pulled out his phone. Would you be willing to talk to her? She doesn't have to talk to you right now. She's been told no by a lot of people, and she's starting to believe it. Naomi thought about a 9-year-old girl being told things by the world and the grandfather who spent years building in her the capacity to hear those things and move through them without being stopped by them. Yes, she said, I'll talk to her. Reyes typed something on his phone. He was smiling in the unguarded way of someone who did not expect to receive a good thing and has received one. They stayed for 20 minutes. Not long, not ceremonial, just present in the space, talking about small things and occasionally about larger things in the way that people talk when the architecture of a relationship has just changed and everyone is finding the new shape of it. When they left, the medical bay felt different. Not because anything in it had physically changed, because the meaning of being in it had changed. It was no longer the room at the edge of the base where the combat medic worked alone. It was a room that people came to. That was not a small thing. At 1900 hours, Dina Tariq knocked and entered without waiting, which was her customary approach, and sat down across from Naomi with the directness that Naomi had come to regard as one of Dina's most reliable qualities. "I want to tell you something," Dina said. "Before the debrief, before you go to regional and tell everything to people with more rank than anyone on this base." "Okay," Naomi said. "When you arrived 3 weeks ago and I came to check the comms unit," Dina said, "and you told me in the first 4 minutes that the water filtration was slow and the comms frequency was outdated, I went back to my station and I wrote a note to myself." Naomi waited. The note said, "Watch this one." Dina paused. "I've been doing this job for 6 years. I've been on 4 forward postings. I write that note maybe once a year, sometimes less." Naomi looked at her. "What made you write it?" "You weren't performing anything," Dina said. "Most people who arrive somewhere new, they perform confidence, or they perform humility, or they perform competence. They're showing you what they want you to see. You were just seeing. You walked into that room and you saw what was wrong with the comms and what was wrong with the filtration, and you told me not to impress me just because those were the facts and you were the person who had noticed them." Naomi was quiet. "I knew then that you were either exactly what your file said or something more than what your file said," Dina said. "I didn't know it would be both." "It's always both," Naomi said. Dina smiled, a real one, brief, the kind that arrives when something true has been said precisely. "Yes," she said, "it usually is." She stood up to go. Then she stopped, the way people stop when they have said the thing they came to say and have discovered there is one more thing behind it. "The debrief," she said. "They're going to ask you what you think should change. Not just about your classification, about the system that produced the classification." "I know," Naomi said. "What are you going to tell them?" Naomi thought about it. Then she said, "I'm going to tell them that a file is not a person, that the first time someone arrives at your unit, you owe them the basic professional respect of reading what they have actually done, not assigning them a category and closing the folder." She paused. "And that the cost of not doing that is not administrative. It is tactical. It is lives." Another pause. "And that the soldiers who were in that convoy 2 days ago are alive because one person prepared for what everyone else dismissed, and that is not a success story. That is a warning." Dina held her gaze for a long moment. "That," she said, "is exactly what needs to be said." She left, and the evening settled into its final hours with the quiet that had always been Naomi's most natural environment. Not empty, not lonely, but full of the particular presence of a person who has never needed noise to feel substantial. The morning of her departure came at 0500 before Reveille, before the base was fully awake. She had packed the night before efficiently, as she did everything with the single bag, in the medical kit, in the rifle case, and the notebook that had been her constant companion through 3 weeks of preparation, and one 8-minute moment that had changed the direction of multiple lives, including her own. She did not plan to say goodbye to anyone. She had arranged transport to the airfield through the logistics officer and had not mentioned the timing to her unit. Not because she was avoiding the moment, but because she had never been a person who needed ceremony, and the things she wanted to carry with her from FOB Kamara were already fully packed in her memory and her notebook, in the way the past 3 weeks had affirmed every principle her grandfather had ever given her. But Quirka was at the vehicles at 0510. He was standing beside the transport as if he had been there for a while, which he had. He was in his full uniform, which was not required at 0510 for a send-off that nobody had announced. He was holding 2 cups of coffee from the mess hall, which opened early on his request. She found out later he had gone to the mess sergeant at 0430 and told him he needed the facility open by 0500 for a reason he did not fully explain. She stopped when she saw him. She did not perform surprise. She just stopped and looked at him. He held out one of the cups. She took it. They stood in the pre-dawn quiet of the base, and for a moment neither of them said anything, and the silence between them was a completely different quality than the silence that had characterized their first interactions. Not distance, not hierarchy, not dismissal. Just 2 people standing in the same moment, fully present. "You could have slept in," she said. "No," he said. "I couldn't." She drank her coffee. He said, "I thought about what I would say on the way over here. I had 4 different versions. I scrapped all of them. Good, she said. Good. The scripted versions are never the right ones. He almost smiled. Then he said, I'm going to change how I lead this unit. Not because of the briefing and not because of the official inquiry. Because of you specifically. Because of watching you operate in an environment that was designed accidentally but effectively to make you smaller and watching you refuse to be smaller. That's not something I can unsee. She looked at him. Kirka, she said, you have good instincts. That's real. The problem wasn't your instincts, it was what you put in front of them. When you let the social structure decide the value of someone before you'd actually looked at what they could do, that's when your instincts were working against you. He absorbed that in the specific way he absorbed everything she said now completely, without deflecting, without softening it into something less uncomfortable. Yeah, he said. Trust the evidence, she said, not the category. Trust the evidence, he repeated, as if he was writing it somewhere internal where it would stay. She finished her coffee, handed the cup back, and picked up her bag. She looked at him one more time. You held pressure on that arterial bleed for 11 minutes exactly the way I told you, she said. Without question, without hesitation. Do you know what that means in a trauma medicine? He looked at her. It means the difference between a soldier who keeps his leg and one who doesn't, she said. That was you. That was your decision under fire to follow the lead of someone you'd spent 2 weeks dismissing. She paused. You changed course when the evidence required it. That's the thing that actually matters. Not the 2 weeks before. That moment. Something shifted in his face, not dramatically but deeply, the way things shift when they move from the surface to the foundation. I'll remember that, he said. I know you will, she said. She walked to the transport vehicle. Calloway was there. She had not seen him until that moment, standing 10 feet back from Kirka, having arrived even earlier, having said nothing, because he understood that the conversation between Kirka and Naomi was not his to interrupt. He had simply been present, witnessing. She looked at him. 810 meters, he said. First shot. I'm going to tell that story until I'm old. Tell it accurately, she said. I'll tell it exactly, he said. She held out her hand. He shook it. The grip, firm and real, the grip of 2 people who have been through something together that will not leave either of them. She got in the transport vehicle. Dina Tariq was sitting in the passenger seat. Naomi looked at her. You're taking me to the airfield. I requisitioned the driver assignment at 2200 last night, Dina said. Someone had to make sure you actually got there. The transport moved through the gate of Phoebe Kamara at 0522 hours. And Naomi looked back once, not from sentiment, not from regret, but because looking back is part of how you know where you have been, and knowing where you have been is part of how you understand where you are going. She saw the base in its pre-dawn state, the shapes of buildings and vehicles in the eastern edge, where the medical base sat, the room that had been her preparation space and her refuge, and the place where she had worked in quiet certainty while the world around her made its easy assessments. She saw the gate closing behind them. She turned back around and faced forward. In the vehicle, Dina said nothing for the first several minutes. The road was empty and the desert was dark, and the distance to the airfield was long enough to hold a real conversation or to hold a real silence. And both of them were people who understood the value of choosing correctly between those two things. Then Dina said, what happens after the debrief? I don't know exactly, Naomi said. The reclassification takes time. There will be a new posting eventually once the process completes. Somewhere my full qualification profile is actually known in advance. And if they ask you to stay in an advisory capacity during the inquiry while they trace the administrative chain, then I stay, she said, as long as I'm useful. You're always useful, Dina said. That's been true from the first 4 minutes. Naomi looked at her. When this is done, she said, wherever I end up posted, I'm going to request you for signals intelligence support on any operation I have meaningful input into. Dina was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I'm going to put in a lateral transfer request to the posting you end up at. Naomi looked at her. Don't make it weird, Dina said. I just prefer working in environments where the right people are actually heard. Those environments are rarer than they should be. When I find one, I try to stay near it. The airfield appeared in the distance. The transport slowed. The sky was beginning to change at its edges, the particular shade of pre-dawn that is neither dark nor light, but something in between, a moment of transition that does not announce itself, but that you can feel if you are paying attention. Naomi picked up her bag. She looked at Dina one more time. "You wrote a note," she said, "3 weeks ago. Watch this one." Dina looked at her. "Yes." "You were right," Naomi said. Dina nodded once with the satisfaction of someone who trusted their own assessment and has been confirmed in it. "I know," she said. "I usually am." The transport stopped. Naomi got out. She stood in the pre-dawn air with her bag and her kit and her rifle case and her notebook, and she breathed the desert in the dry heat that was already present even before full daylight. The particular quality of air in a place that does not care whether you belong there, that tests everyone equally and makes no distinctions based on category or classification or the label that someone attached to your file before reading it. She had passed the test. She had always been going to pass the test. That was not the question the desert had been asking. The question was whether the people standing beside her were going to see it in time for it to matter. Some of them had not, and that had cost something real. And the cost was now on record officially in the kind of documentation that changes systems rather than just individuals. And that change, slow, structural, imperfect, was already in motion. And some of them had seen it. Dina from the first 4 minutes, Calloway from day 11, Wald from a hospital bed with the particular clarity of a man who knows that the person who kept him alive was doing it at personal risk. Kirka at the moment when reality replaced the story he had been living inside. Boateng at the moment when honesty cost him something and he paid it anyway. And the two soldiers in recovery, Peterson with his improving oxygen saturation and Wald with his rebuilt leg, and their whole futures ahead of them. The futures that were there because one person refused to be smaller than she was, even when the environment made it costly, even when the channels were closed, even when the only audience for her preparation was a notebook and a memory of a grandfather's voice in the mountains of Algeria. Naomi Ashore walked toward the aircraft. She did not look back again. She carried everything she needed, and she had always carried it, and the world was finally slowly correctly beginning to understand that. She had never been support staff. She had always been the soldier whose presence changes outcomes. And now the record said so too.